The smell of war is no longer distant in the Sahel. It is here. It is real. A few weeks ago, whispers of French military bases encircling Burkina Faso were dismissed as paranoia. Today, they are confirmed fact, armed outposts dressed as security cooperation but designed for control. But just as the noose seemed to tighten, Captain Ibrahim Traoré did the unthinkable. Under the blazing Sahel sun, before a sea of Burkinabe soldiers, he handed over 3,200 brand-new Russian-made weapons, tanks, bombers, rifles, missiles. Not relics, but power. And with a voice steady as steel, he declared, "If you need anything else, call me directly." That moment was not merely strategic. It was spiritual, a defiant declaration that Africa will no longer beg for peace. It will defend its own. Stay with us, because this is not just another headline. This is the heartbeat of a new Africa. Subscribe and witness the revolution that cannot be televised. It must be remembered. Traoré and the turning point, the great weapons handover. The heat was merciless. The kind of dry, breathless heat that cracks the ground and blurs the horizon. But no one moved. Thousands of soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the Sahel sun, their boots anchored in the red dust of the motherland, their eyes fixed forward, not on threat, but on promise. And then from among them walked a man, not with fanfare, not with bodyguards, just a captain in uniform, hands unloved, stride steady, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't come to speak. He came to arm a movement. Before the gathered regiments, Traoré revealed what few had dared imagine. A convoy of 3,200 new generation Russian-made weapons, massive fuel tankers, armored buses thick enough to repel rockets, high-range missile launchers, bombers capable of leveling foreign bases in minutes, and rifles, endless boxes of them, clean, oiled, and ready. It was not a handover. It was a ceremony of rebirth. As he stepped up to speak, there was no translator, no Western press, no polished podium. Just his voice, clear and sharp. "I'm symbolically handing over the keys to this equipment. Begin the long-awaited development of the war. If you're missing anything, come back to me. I will return to the people." That single sentence echoed across the desert like thunder before a storm. It wasn't a performance. It was a promise. The promise of a leader who doesn't ask his people to fight, he joins them. What unfolded that day was more than a military deployment. It was the birth of a united resistance. It was the Sahel drawing its line, and the world, especially France, heard it loud and clear. For decades, Burkina Faso had been armed only with borrowed tools and hollow agreements. Military aid came with strings. Training came with oversight. Sovereignty came in whispers. But now, the country was holding its own keys. Traoré Burkina Faso was no longer a phrase to be questioned. It was a headline written in steel. Across the border, satellites blinked. French officials in Abidjan whispered into secure phones. Analysts in Washington revised their maps. The Sahel had changed. In a world where military might often speaks the loudest, Traoré had just altered the entire rhythm of the region. And he didn't do it behind closed doors. He did it with sunlight on his shoulders and the future at his feet. Soldiers saluted not out of duty, but out of devotion. They watched the trucks roll forward, thick with weaponry, bound for every vulnerable point along Burkina Faso's border. For the first time in modern African memory, a leader had armed his people before arming his ego. No flashy uniforms, no foreign dignitaries, no ceremonial signatures. Just grit, trust, and readiness. This wasn't an act of aggression. It was defense in its purest form, not just of land, but of legacy. Traoré's message to France and her allies was unmistakable. We are not afraid. We are not alone. We are not yours. And so, under the Saharan sky, with dust swirling like ancestral breath, the Sahel stood reborn. This was not a war cry. It was a call to dignity, a declaration that if anyone dared cross the border again, they would not find a fragmented colony, they would find a fortress. It's easy to underestimate the importance of that moment, but history will not. Just as Patrice Lumumba gave voice to Congolese independence and Thomas Sankara reminded Africa of its own spine, Ibrahim Traoré now walks among their echoes. In that heat, beneath that flag, surrounded by soldiers and sand, he delivered more than weapons. He delivered a message. Africa will no longer ask for sovereignty. It will seize it. Why France is afraid, the secret behind the military bases. Fear, in the corridors of power, doesn't arrive with sirens. It arrives in silence, in sealed documents, in panicked boardroom meetings, in late-night calls to embassies. And across France, that silence is growing louder, because the unthinkable has begun to unfold. Africa is waking up, and France is losing control. For years, Paris believed its grip on the Sahel was unshakable. With military bases discreetly scattered across Ivory Coast, Chad, Senegal, and Benin, all bordering the Sahel, it created a ring of influence cloaked in the language of security cooperation. But these weren't outposts of peace. They were outposts of pressure. France claimed these bases were meant to counter terrorism. But what terrorism did they truly fear? Not extremists, not militants, but minds, African minds, daring to think freely. And that is what makes Traoré Burkina Faso such a threat. Because this isn't just about weapons. It's about vision. It's about a continent refusing to remain bent. Traoré's move to distribute thousands of heavy arms across Burkina Faso's borders sent shockwaves, not because of what he gave, but because of what he denied, the need for French protection. And with that, the entire game changed. Let us be clear. France is not worried about Burkina Faso alone. They are worried about the dominoes. Because Traoré is not standing alone. He is standing with Goïta of Mali and Tiani of Niger, two men who also chose defiance over diplomacy, unity over submission. Together, they've done what many feared and others only dreamt of, merged their national armies into one cohesive Sahel force, placing over 200,000 troops under a single command. It is no longer three countries. It is one front line. This military merger did not just shake the geopolitics of West Africa. It unraveled the entire post-colonial illusion France worked so hard to maintain. France's economy, weakened by internal unrest and rising costs, remains dangerously dependent on African resources. Niger's uranium powers French homes while Nigerian villages go dark. Mali's gold funds French infrastructure while Malian children eat from empty plates. The moment these nations reclaimed control of their own wealth, Paris began to choke. But rather than negotiate with dignity, France responded with paranoia. Intelligence networks intensified. Military drills increased near the Sahel border. Surveillance balloons rose. Whispered promises of support were offered to neighboring leaders, hoping to isolate the alliance. French troops were moved closer to the edge, not to protect, but to provoke. And they found willing partners in puppets. Leaders in Senegal, Benin, and Ivory Coast opened their soils again to French boots. Not for the people, for offshore accounts, for hidden contracts, for whispered power. But what they didn't calculate was the people. Across the region, ordinary citizens began to question. Why are foreign soldiers surrounding Sahel countries if the threat is from within? Why are drones circling towns that declared independence, not war? Why is France still in Africa, if not for Africa? France fears the answer, because it is no longer hidden. The Sahel Alliance has exposed the facade. The so-called peacekeeping is simply neo-colonial management. And now that veil is tearing. The old tactics no longer work. No longer can France claim chaos while funding corruption. No longer can they divide and conquer when the Sahel speaks with one voice. This is why the military bases exist, not as shields, but as symbols of desperation. The West still believes Africa can be stopped with sanctions, bases, and bad press. But the Sahel has shown them something else, that a united people driven not by fear, but by purpose, cannot be silenced. Traoré didn't just resist, he exposed, and in exposing the game, he has changed the rules. So let the maps be redrawn. Let the generals whisper in bunkers. Let France send its warnings. Because while they prepare for war, the Sahel prepares for history. This is not just war, this is the second liberation. War is fought with weapons, but liberation, true liberation, is fought with memory, with meaning, with the quiet revolution of the mind. And across the Sahel, what is happening today is not just a military standoff, it is a spiritual uprising, a dismantling not only of colonial presence, but of colonial thought. This is not a conflict. This is a cleansing. The West calls it instability, but for millions of Africans, it is a reckoning, a resurrection, the rebirth of dignity long buried beneath flags and treaties that never meant freedom. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré handed over weapons to his army, he wasn't just preparing for war. He was declaring that the real battle was already underway, not in trenches but in classrooms, banks, and ministries. And Burkina Faso, once mocked as a backwater, is now leading a continent-wide decolonial revolution. Step into a Burkinabe school today, and you'll notice something missing: the French curriculum. Gone are the outdated textbooks glorifying European explorers and economists. In their place, lessons on local history, agriculture, indigenous science, and ancestral wisdom. Children are no longer being taught to revere the Eiffel Tower. They are learning the stories of Thomas Sankara, Queen Yanenga, and the kingdoms that ruled before colonization. This is the essence of what Traoré calls the second independence. The first gave us flags. The second must give us freedom. But education is just the beginning. In Mali, President Goïta has nationalized gold mines once operated by French companies under exploitative contracts. No more hidden deals. No more foreign shareholders extracting wealth while locals live in dust and debt. That gold now funds infrastructure, hospitals, and local governance, not yachts on the French Riviera. In Niger, uranium once shipped quietly to Paris now powers a different mission: national pride. The government has reclaimed ownership over its mining operations, demanding fair prices, environmental standards, and transparent audits. For the first time in living memory, Nigerian officials control the narrative and the numbers. And at the heart of it all, money. The CFA franc, the colonial currency controlled by France for over 70 years, is on its last breath. For decades, it allowed Paris to dictate the monetary policy of West and Central Africa. Traoré, Goïta, and Tiani have said, enough. Plans are underway for sovereign currencies backed by local resources, governed by African economists, not European institutions. France fears this more than tanks, because once a people think for themselves, they cannot be conquered. This second liberation is not about rejecting everything Western. It is about remembering who we are. Traoré Burkina Faso is not just a name, it is a symbol of refusal. Refusal to obey systems that kept us small. Refusal to be defined by borders drawn by strangers. Refusal to measure development by the approval of donors. And this movement is spreading. In Madagascar, the people recently rose against President Andry Rajoelina, long accused of favoring French interests. When he fled in a French helicopter, it was not just the fall of a man, it was the collapse of a mindset. One more puppet gone. One more link in the chain broken. From Guinea to Chad, from the markets of Bamako to the coastlines of Togo, the whisper is growing. We want our second independence. This is not ideology. It is identity. The first liberation was fought with slogans and treaties. The second is being fought with curriculum, contracts, and currency. It is being fought in the soil and in the soul. It is not televised, but it is happening. And it is irreversible. So when France builds military bases and calls it protection, remember, no empire builds walls around free people unless they fear what those people might become. The West once feared African warriors. Now it fears African thinkers. And that more than any weapon is why they tremble. Because the real revolution is not in the guns. It is in the minds now refusing to kneel. When the youth don't just carry guns, a people's revolution. You may train an army, but you cannot manufacture spirit. And what is rising across the Sahel is not just a military strategy. It is a people's revolution The kind that no drone can predict, no foreign analyst can decode, and no propaganda can contain. Because the revolution in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, is not being fought by soldiers alone. It is being carried by farmers, students, mothers, elders. It is being built not just with weapons, but with work, will, and wisdom. Captain Traoré's strategy was never about firepower alone. It was about fire, the one burning inside every citizen who has lived too long in the shadow of foreign flags. And today, that fire is spreading faster than any broadcast, faster than any battle. In villages once known only for poverty, young mechanics are turning tractors into armored patrol vehicles. In roadside garages, old car parts are repurposed into missile casings and mobile defense tools. These are not engineers from European universities. These are sons of the soil, men and women whose hands know rust resistance and resurrection. Alongside them, farmers have joined the movement, not with rifles, but with resolve. They transport food to military outposts under cover of darkness. They grow extra crops, not for profit, but to feed the cause. Their plows cut through earth like their ancestors once cut through enemy lines, with purpose. And the women, oh, the women, they are the heartbeat of this revolution. In marketplaces, they gather not just to trade goods, but to exchange information, coordinate supplies, and organize community watch groups. Many have taken up first aid training, ready to tend to fighters if war reaches their doorstep. Others host local forums, educating children and neighbors on what this movement truly means, not just to survive, but to reclaim dignity. And then there are the elders, often forgotten in the modern world. They now sit at the center of strategy, not as commanders, but as keepers of memory. They remind the youth of who they are, of what was lost, of what must be protected. In mosques under baobab trees, in family courtyards, they speak the names of forgotten heroes and hidden betrayals. They are the living libraries of the Sahel. This is not just war. This is culture in motion. This is identity standing up straight. The revolution is so deeply woven into the people that even if every gun were lost, the movement would continue. Because its roots are not in barracks, they're in bloodlines. Young poets now write verses that rally towns. Rappers perform anti-colonial anthems in city squares. TikTok and WhatsApp have become digital battlefields where truth spreads faster than lies. The same youth who once dreamed of fleeing to Europe now dream of defending Africa. Because now they see what was hidden, that their future does not lie in exile, but in emancipation. This is what modern liberation looks like. A mechanic with grease on his hands building bomb-resistant vehicles. A mother with a phone and a spreadsheet tracking supply lines. A 17-year-old girl learning Swahili and Mande history because the old curriculum never mentioned her roots. This is no longer just news. This is living African news, written not by journalists, but by the people themselves. Every village, every district, every marketplace is its own broadcast station now. And the message is the same: we are ready. France cannot fight this. No empire can. Because this isn't just resistance, it's resurrection. The mistake colonial powers always made was thinking Africa could only fight back with fists. What they forgot is that we also fight with faith, with food, with family. And those are weapons that never run out of ammunition. From the rolling plains of Burkina Faso to the rocky highlands of Niger, every citizen now knows they are not waiting for heroes. They have become the heroes. France and the collapse that can no longer be avoided. There is a silence creeping through the marble halls of Paris, not the silence of confidence, but the silence of collapse. A slow, choking unraveling of a system built on stolen breath. And now, with every step the Sahel takes toward independence, France takes another step toward the edge. This is not panic sparked by protests or policy. This is panic rooted in truth. For over 80 years, France lived like a monarch, feeding off Africa's veins. And now the veins are closing. French factories are shutting down. Energy prices are soaring. Investors are pulling out. Not because of global inflation, but because the lifeline that once pumped gold, uranium, and oil into France's economy, the Sahel, is no longer theirs to command. In Niger, uranium once shipped silently to light up Parisian homes now remains in the soil. In Burkina Faso, the gold that once funded French luxury now glitters under national protection. In Mali, cotton once woven into French fashion now warms local villages. And what is France doing? They are encircling bases in Senegal, Benin, Ivory Coast, Chad, positioned like vultures, military drills masked as peacekeeping, intelligence operations posing as cooperation, puppet leaders whispering promises of access in exchange for offshore accounts. It is not security, it is siege, but it is failing, because France miscalculated one thing. This time, the African people are awake. Captain Traoré and the Sahel Alliance have not only fortified their borders, they've fortified their spirits. Every attempt by France to destabilize the movement has backfired. Sanctions only inspired more self-reliance. Media propaganda only fueled more clarity. Covert threats only sparked more unity. France believed they were facing rogue states. What they are facing is a rebirth. In the war rooms of Europe, generals argue over next steps. But no strategy can answer the simplest truth. You cannot colonize what refuses to kneel. Reports now show that over 200,000 soldiers serve under one Sahel command. Russian-made tanks roll across Burkina Faso's sands. Chinese engineers reinforce defense lines. Surveillance drones patrol the skies, not to monitor but to warn. We see you. We are ready. Meanwhile, Paris is trembling, not because of what has been lost, but because of what could still fall. If the Sahel succeeds, the fear is not just Mali or Niger rising. The fear is Gabon, Congo, Ivory Coast, and beyond. The fear is the collapse of the very idea of French Africa. This is why they are desperate, because France no longer controls the economy, the army, or the narrative. And when the story changes, the empire crumbles. Across French media, they call it a crisis. But for Africa, this is clarity. For the first time, the continent sees that its poverty was never accidental. It was engineered. And now that the machine is broken, France has nothing to offer but memory. The old world order is crumbling not with a bang, but with a breath, the breath of African people saying enough. And yet, even now, France clings to illusions. They believe a war can save them, that one decisive strike can silence the Sahel. But this is not 1885. This is not the scramble for Africa. This is 2025. And Africa is no longer fragmented. It is focused. The mistake Paris keeps making is thinking that revolutions can be bombed. But this is not just a military revolt. It is a generational awakening. It is the fire of ancestors lit once more. And that fire cannot be extinguished by jets or diplomacy. It can only grow. So as France plots and postures, it faces a truth it can no longer deny. Its empire is finished. What remains is only delay. Because the Sahel will not bow. And if France chooses war, it will not be a conflict between nations. It will be a conflict between an empire desperate to live and a continent finally ready to breathe. And this time, the breath will not be stolen. Final message: freedom is no longer a dream. From the dusty borders of Burkina Faso to the restless boulevards of Paris, a message has been carved into history. Africa will no longer kneel. What began as whispers in the Sahel has roared into a continental cry, not just for resistance, but for rebirth. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not simply distribute weapons. He ignited a movement, one rooted in dignity, fueled by memory, and driven by unity. In that moment, Traoré Burkina Faso became more than a name. It became a symbol of Africa's refusal to die quietly. This is no longer a struggle for territory. It is a demand for truth, for justice, for sovereignty not handed down by treaties, but taken back by a people who remember who they are. Across every platform, every town hall, every gathering, from the echo chambers of YouTube to the quiet scrolls of TikTok, This revolution has taken root, and it is now the most urgent headline in African news, written not by corporations, but by communities. So we ask you, will you stand for the Africa that France tried to bury? Will you speak the names of Traoré, Goita, Tiani, not as rebels, but as restorers? Because history is not written in ink. It is written in courage. And this time, Africa holds the pen. If this story moved something in your chest, don't scroll past. Stand with us. Speak with us. Subscribe. Like. Share. Because they erased our past, but together, we will speak our future out loud. Drop your thoughts in the comments. New Africa. Africa can do it. The fire has begun. Burkina will never kneel. Let the world feel what they tried to hide. And remember, this isn't just a fight between nations. This is a fight between silence and voice, between submission and soul, between yesterday's lies and tomorrow's freedom. The question is no longer if Africa will rise. The question is, who will rise with her?